Welcome back. Time to break down this list and talk about the most talented offensive players in the NSIC. So to do that, we have David Brown and Greg Enkers joining us, two guys that have traveled a lot of miles to watch a lot of NSIC games and call those games. So guys, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, David, we're going to start with you. You know, a lot of talented players in the NSIC, plus a lot of teams. How do you narrow this down to 5?
It's tough. It's really tough. And I think part of that reason is because the switch to spread offenses over the past couple of years. Essentially, 95% of teams in the NSIC do some sort of spread offense. And it's remarkable. I think this list would have been a lot tougher last year when you had some all-time quarterbacks. Trey Hyde at Augustana, Jack Nelson at Winona State, Drew Bauer at UMD. There's only one quarterback on our list. He's a good one, but I think it would have been a lot tougher to do this list last year than this year. Nevertheless, the position players, I think, are making more of an impact this year than necessarily the quarterbacks.
Well, you talk about the quarterbacks, and of course, remember the Trey Hydes and people like that, but our number one player, as voted by you guys, is Damon Gibson, the wide receiver. So, Greg, what makes him the top player?
Well, I think there's 3 areas to Damon Gibson's game that makes him the number one player on our list anyway. I think it starts with his size. I think at 6'4", 236 pounds, I mean, you look at just that alone, he's probably averages about 4 inches and 40 pounds on all the defensive backs that he goes up against. So that makes him a very difficult matchup just from a size standpoint. Then you talk about his hands. He's got 53 catches this season, averaging almost 3 more receptions per game than anyone else in the league. So I think that ability to catch the ball wherever his quarterback puts it, I think makes him a dangerous threat. And then also, I know the NSIC is very familiar with his work over the last couple of years, but I think his speed, can sometimes be a little bit deceptive too. The way that he gets in and out of breaks and the way he runs his routes. There you see him get behind the defenders there. I mean, that should just not be happening. But Gibson makes it happen each and every single week, and so I think that makes him a clear-cut number one candidate.
Well, Damon Gibson, one of 2 wide receivers on the list, and Gibson at 6'4", but the other one, let's break this list down, Jason Baltz, 5'11" from UMD. What makes him so good, David?
I think it's his versatility. Jason Baltz was put in a tough spot this year. He had to take over for Nate Ricci, who's out for the season with an injury. Nate Ricci was the Bulldogs' leading returning receiver, but Baltz has stepped up in a big way. He's second in the conference in receiving yards and second in yards per catch, and he's helped new quarterback Ben Everhart sort of acclimate to this offense. Remember, Ben Everhart started the season as the 3rd-string quarterback for UMD. They had injuries to their first 2 quarterbacks, so when you consider the fact that Baltz is stepping up for both a new quarterback and in place of a wide receiver who was supposed to help him on the opposite side, I think that's why you put him at number 5. In addition to that, he's also on special teams. He returns kicks, he returns punts, and I think that versatility and stepping up in the absence of some key players for UMD is the reason why Jason Baltz is the other wide receiver on this list besides Damon Gibson.
And he's from Barron, Wisconsin, right by my hometown. So
little brag for you.
Cool, I guess. All right, looking at the only quarterback on the list, something you don't always see when it comes to top 5 offensive players, but Zach Osborne from Wayne State. So, Greg, how valuable is he to those Wildcats?
Yeah, quarterbacks are always a focal point of an offense, right? And Osborne certainly is the case for Wayne State College. He accounts for nearly 70% of Wayne State's offense this season. So I think that alone, I mean, they're doing it so much with his arm. And they really missed him, I think, in the Augustana game. I know that they were able to pull that one out in a tight 16-13 game, but they threw for under 150 yards in that game, and I do not believe that would have been the case had Osborne been in there. He's averaging almost 270 yards per contest. His completion percentage is north of 60% this season, so coaches love that. And he's smart with the football, too. Only 5 picks thrown on the season, and for a guy who's throwing the ball a lot in these football games, to only turn it over 5 times is an impressive statistic as well. So Osborne, definitely a very focal point of the Wildcats offense this season.
Well, you can't talk about top offensive players without running backs, and on this list it's Max Mickey and Nate Gunn. So David, why are they the 2 top runners in the Northern Sun?
Well, the easy answer is because they're the 2 top rushers in the Northern Sun, but we'll go one by one with Nate Gunn, the transfer from UST. I think it's a little bit of a misnomer for Minnesota State. Over the past couple of years, they've relied on a stable of running backs, but Nate Gunn is a true workhorse. He's only one of 3 backs in the conference with over 100 carries this season, leads the conference with 949 yards, and they're relying on him to be that workhorse running back, which again is something that MSU is not used to in the past. They've relied on a cavalry, sort of a by committee system. And Nate Gunn is just obliterating that. In addition to leading the conference in rushing, leads the conference in rushing touchdowns with 10. He's a home run threat every time he touches the ball, and that's allowed the Maverick wide receivers to make more plays. Guys on the outside like Ty Dennis and Shane Zylstra, for example. So that's why I have Gunn in the middle of the pack at this number 3 ranking on our list, because although I don't think he's nearly quite as versatile as Max Mickey, I think he's sort of blowing up the concepts of what Minnesota State is used to as a running back. But I put Max Mickey slightly ahead of him, and you could see why last week. He hurt himself in practice, missed the Winona State game, and USF had only 65 yards on the ground in their loss at Winona State. For Mickey, to me, it's the versatility. He's 5'9", but he loves running between the tackles. He led the conference in rushing last season. He knew with the offensive turnover this season that guys would still be keying on him, and he still does well. Until he got hurt, he led the conference in rushing, has over 870 yards and 8 touchdowns. And the fact that he can be a home run threat as well, and likes running between the tackles, doesn't like to go outside as much with being the height he is at 5'9", I just think that makes him just a tad better than Nate Gunn. But these are both incredible, fantastic running backs, good representatives of the NSIC for being powerful guys who aren't afraid of contact, who like to run between the tackles, and as I mentioned, can be a home run threat every time they touch the ball.
Yeah, both very close to 1,000 yards already midway through the season. But looking at this list, you narrowed it down to 5. But for both of you, do you think there are some players that were kind of honorable mention or could have made the list but just didn't? Greg, we'll start with you.
Yeah, again, I'll go back to quarterbacks. It is interesting. We only have one on the list in Osborne from Wayne State, but Bemidji State has a pretty good one too. And Jordan Hine, he's second in the NSIC with 1,400 yards through the air. He's got 16 touchdown passes versus just 3 interceptions. And I think he's a big part of the reason why you see Bemidji State tweeting out week in and week out, thanking NFL scouts for being there. I think it starts and stops with Jordan Hine when you talk about Bemidji State.
All right, David.
I'll add to that for Bemidji State. Andrew Lukowski, their running back, had a career-high 163 yards last week in their win over UMary. Another running back, Rashad Trimble for Wayne State, third in the conference in rushing. There's a whole list of guys I could go down. I'll end with 3 guys from SMSU. Their offense has kind of hit a struggling point since Blake Gimble got hurt. If Blake Gimble wasn't hurt, he'd be on my top 5 right now. He's just such a dynamic quarterback, has had back-to-back 3,000-yard seasons before getting hurt in week 2. And his absence has meant that guys like Nate Hewitt, who's the all-time leader in receptions in the NSIC over the course of his career, that's why he's not on the list. And Max Simmons, a freshman running back, had 18 touchdowns last season. He's been put in check a little bit. He's also been dealing with some injury issues. So a trio of Mustangs, in my opinion, could have been on this list, but because of injuries, they weren't necessarily on it. But again, tons of great offensive talent in this conference.
Well, we talked about it yesterday. It's just kind of that point in the season where those injuries are starting to
the war of attrition.
Yes, exactly. All right, well, that's our list for today. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's how our panel picked the order, but now let's take a look at how you voted in our Twitter poll. This might have been the most evenly voted poll we've had yet, but here we go. In 4th place at 19%, remember Twitter only allows 4 options, but it's Wayne State's Zach Osborne. And now it gets a little tricky. 3rd place at 25%, Nate Gunn, Minnesota State. Coming in at 2nd at 27%, Damon Gibson, our number 1 pick of MSU Moorhead. And the top spot belongs to USF's Max Mickey at 29%, a photo finish in that one. Again, thanks for participating in that poll. We'll have a new one out Tuesday of next week. Coming up next, Midco SN's Levi Vanderweide gets us up to speed on all the new happenings at the Jackson Motorplex. And later we recap some big games in North Dakota High School volleyball. You're watching Midco Sports Tonight.